Jesus is now switching gears, and he's starting to talk about the law, and he's giving a quick summary of the things that will follow in the next verses and chapters. He says this in verse 17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all is accomplished." So what he's saying here is he is reacting to some kind of wrong expectation that out of his ministry, somehow the law would be abolished. We don't really know who had that kind of expectation. Maybe some of his followers thought that the system of the law didn't fully work for them, so maybe Jesus would come and give a new set of laws that they can abide by. So he's ruling out that as a wrong expectation. He says, that's not what I've come to do. Instead, I have come to fulfill. And just so you know, until heaven and earth pass away, not one stroke of a letter will pass away. Now, that is a way of saying here that the law in itself is perfect. Why is it perfect? Because it is of God and it represents God. We know who God is and what he's like by looking at the law and by looking at the things that he wants us to do and the things that he does not want us to do. So Jesus says, the law in itself is perfect and of God. But there will come a time when it will be accomplished. So there he's implying that the law was given for a time and for a purpose. And one time, at some point, the time will come when that purpose has been fulfilled and the law will not be needed anymore. The time and the purpose of the law will have expired, as it were. And he says, I will be the one who will come and do that. I will be the one who will fulfill that. Now, let's just maybe generally have a look at the relationship between a Christian and the law, because there is, I think, much misunderstanding, and this is an opportunity where we can import some of the things that especially Paul is saying later. So let's have a look at the law, and some of the key passages here, I would say, are Romans, probably all of Romans, but in particular Romans 7, and then also Galatians 3. Now, the way it works is that there is an old creation from the beginning of creation until Jesus, and now there is a new creation. And in the middle of those two is the cross. Okay, so what belongs to the old creation? To the old creation belongs the old covenant, the covenant of Moses. To the old creation belongs death. To the old creation belongs sin. And to the old creation belongs the law. To the new creation, however, belongs the new covenant. To the new creation belongs, instead of death, eternal life. Instead of sin belongs right relationship with God as a result of Jesus' dying on the cross. And instead of the law, now the Spirit. So what if we zoom in on the law in particular, what does that mean? It means that the law firmly belongs in Christian thought, firmly belongs to the old creation. The system of the law is abolished as far as its functionality goes. However, it is not abolished as far as its truthfulness in the way that it talks about God is concerned. Remember, the law is still perfect and is still true in what it says to us about God, but it is not the means by which we have a relationship with God. Now let's look at what that means, and the key to that here, I think, is Galatians 3, where Paul calls the law a tutor. So the way a tutor would have worked, the system of a tutor would have worked in Old Testament times and in ancient times, is that there is a father who has a child, and the way he relates to that child is through a tutor. So in other words, he would employ a tutor who would raise the child, and that tutor would teach the child right and wrong. It would give the child rules to obey by, and the father would have a relationship to the child via the tutor. So the tutor would report back to the father how the child is doing, and so on and so forth. So the tutor would carry responsibility in some way over the child, and the child would have to perfectly obey the tutor in its infancy stage. So that is while the child is an infant. Now, when the child matures, however, the relationship is now different, because then you have the father and you have the child, who is now a grown man, and the relationship is a direct one. The father and the child now relate to each other directly. Now the tutor still exists, but the role of the tutor is not anymore to teach the child or to rule over the child. The role of the tutor now is it's probably something like a friend of the child. And a child is maybe not the right term anymore, because it's now the son. The child is now the grown son who will take over parts of the father's business or kingdom, if it's a king, or whatever. And the way the son would now relate to the tutor is as a friend and possibly as an advisor. And I think this is the image that Paul invokes when he speaks about the law as a tutor. He says there used to be a time from Adam to Jesus in which the law was the one thing that ruled over us and that we had to perfectly obey, and by means of which we had a relationship to God. Now, in the new times, now that we have grown up, now that we are a new creation, we have a direct relationship to the Father, and that is by means of the Spirit. So where there was the law as a tutor here, now there is the Spirit, who is God himself, who is enabling us to have a relationship with him directly. Now the tutor or the law is still correct in what it says about God, and in the truth that it talks about God. And the child then, when it discerns what the father wants, would still look to the tutor and ask, what do you think? What is your opinion on this? So as Christians, we still look to the law and the things that God said to the Israelites and Moses and so on, and we still try to discern what is the character of God, what is the right thing to do in all those things. And then we would assess it by the Spirit. So so by the Spirit we would assess the things that we read in the law, but the law doesn't rule over us in any way. So when it comes to issues that we have in Christian churches, whether it's something like tithing or maybe something, nobody really talks about sacrifices anymore, but if it comes maybe to the Sabbath, when it comes to all these kind of things, we see that we don't live in them anymore. We don't have an obligation to tithe. We don't have an obligation to keep the Sabbath. Yet we look to them and we say, what do you think? And by the Spirit we discern, okay, God still wants us to honor him with the first fruit of our increase. God still wants us to take our time to spend with him, and so on and so forth.